The letter arrived on a Tuesday. 2 sentences, 1 signature, a company name that meant nothing to most people in Ironwood, Georgia, and everything to one man who had spent 3 years learning to live with what that name had cost him. He read it standing at his workbench. Read it again. Set it down. Outside, a young woman in a wheelchair was crossing the street toward his garage. She didn't know who her father was to him. He didn't know yet what he was about to build, or what it would cost to build it, or who would try to take it, or how many lives were sitting quietly on the other side of that decision, waiting. He just knew the problem was real, and he had never once in his life walked away from a broken thing. He opened the door. The morning Ezra Webb turned 62, he did not celebrate. He woke at 4:30. Same as always. Pulled on his work shirt in the dark, the blue one with the frayed collar that his daughter Nia had threatened to throw away at least a dozen times. He still wore it. He would keep wearing it until it fell apart completely. Maybe longer than that. The drive to the garage took 6 minutes. He knew every crack in the road, every pothole the city had promised to fix for the last 3 years. He drove around them without thinking, the way you navigate grief after enough time. Not because the pain is gone, because your body learns the shape of it. Webb's Auto Repair sat on the corner of Delmar and 5th, in the part of Ironwood, Georgia that the Chamber of Commerce brochures never photographed. The building was old. The sign was older. His grandfather had built the original structure, with 4 other men from Greater Hope Baptist, trading labor for lumber on weekends when the regular jobs were done. His father had expanded it twice, added the second bay, put in proper lighting, painted the outside that particular shade of deep burgundy that had faded now to something closer to rust. Ezra had never changed the color. He unlocked the front door, stepped inside, reached for the light switch with the ease of a man who has performed the same motion 10,000 times. The fluorescents buzzed and flickered before settling into their cold white hum. Then he did what he always did first. He crossed to the workbench, lifted the metal box from its place on the second shelf, set it on the surface with both hands, the way you handle something you do not want to drop. The paint was scratched badly on the left side. The hinges had been replaced twice, but the lettering on the lid was still clear, still sharp, hand-stamped into the metal by a man Ezra had never met but felt like he knew anyway. Thomas Webb, 1961. His grandfather's name, his grandfather's tools. Ezra opened the box, checked the contents the way he always checked them. Not because anything was missing, because the ritual was the point. Because some mornings the only thing that gets a man from the bed to the door to the workbench is the weight of something familiar in his hands. He looked up at the wall above the bench. Nia looked back. The photograph had been there for 3 years. He had put it up 3 weeks after the funeral, when he finally accepted that taking it down was not the same as letting go. She was 21 in the photo, Spellman sweatshirt. That laugh that started in her whole body before it ever reached her face. She had her mother's eyes and his mother's stubbornness, and some combination of both that had made her the kind of person a room rearranged itself around. She had died on a Tuesday morning in March. Heart defect. Congenital. Something she had been born with that had waited, patient and quiet, for 2 decades before it announced itself in a way that could not be ignored. The surgery she needed required equipment that Ironwood Regional did not have. The equipment they needed required funding that had been denied in a budget review 4 months before she went into the hospital. Ezra knew the details. He had learned them afterward, the way you learn the mechanics of a crash after the car is already in the ditch. Understanding how it happened does not change what happened, but he had needed to understand anyway. He made coffee, opened the first bay door. The morning air came in damp and smelling of Georgia clay after rain. He stood in the opening for a moment, cup in hand, watching the sky do what skies do in early April, threaten and delay and then finally decide. It started raining at 5:47. Not hard. Just that thin, persistent kind of rain that doesn't commit to anything, but doesn't stop either. The kind that makes everything look like it's been left out too long. He went back inside, pulled Mrs. Aldridge's Buick into the first bay, started the inspection. Fell into the rhythm that had been the spine of his days for 30 years. The hiss of the lift, the particular way his knees protested when he crouched, the grease that got under his nails no matter how carefully he worked. He did not notice her at first. He heard the sound, a metallic scraping, irregular, then a pause, then again. He looked toward the open bay door, saw nothing, went back to work, heard it again. This time he walked to the entrance and looked properly. She was on the sidewalk across the street, a young woman, 21. She was sitting in a wheelchair that had decided, apparently, that this particular Tuesday morning was a fine time to have a mechanical failure. The front left wheel was canted at a wrong angle. She had the panel on the side of the chair open. She was trying to reach the axle mechanism with a wrench that was, without question, the wrong size for what she was attempting. She was not asking for help. That was the first thing he noticed. Not her. The fact that she had not looked up, had not flagged anyone down, had not done anything except diagnose the problem herself and attempt to solve it with the tools she had, which were inadequate, which she clearly knew, which had not stopped her. She had a small canvas bag beside the chair. The wrench had come from there. She put it back, pulled out another. Still wrong. Her jaw tightened. She did not curse, she thought. She repositioned her grip and tried a different angle. Ezra watched for 2 minutes, maybe 3. Then he went to his toolbox. He did not take the full kit, just pulled out the one she needed. 3/8 drive, standard, the right fit for that particular axle housing, if he was reading the chair correctly from 30 feet away. He crossed the street, stopped beside her. Did not crouch down, because crouching down would mean looking at her from below, which was not how he talked to people. He stood, extended the wrench. She looked up. Her eyes were dark brown, the kind that look almost black in low light. Her hair was pulled back in a loose twist, a few strands wet at the edges from the rain. She was wearing a deep blue dress, fitted through the waist, the kind of dress that suggested she had been somewhere the night before, or was planning to go somewhere later. The hem was damp at the bottom from the wet sidewalk. She looked at the wrench, then at him, then at the wrench again. That's a 3/8. Yes. You think that's what I need? I think that's what fits that axle housing. He paused. But you know your chair. She looked at him for one more second, then took the wrench. She didn't say thank you. Not yet. She found the bolt, turned it, felt the correct resistance. A sound came from her throat, short and sharp. Not quite satisfaction, but close to it. She made the adjustment, 2 turns, and then manually tested the wheel rotation with her palm. Better. She looked up again, handed the wrench back. How did you know the size from over there? The housing profile on that model. Quickie Q7, right? He tilted his head slightly. Those use a standard 3/8 on the front axle bolts. Common failure point on the left side because of the way weight distributes when you push. She stared at him. You know wheelchair mechanics? I know anything with moving parts. He looked at the chair again. You've got some wear on the front caster bracket too. Left side is fine, right side's starting to pull. You'll feel it as a slight drift when you're moving straight. She turned the chair slowly in place. Felt it. That started about 2 weeks ago. Bushing's going. Not urgent, but worth replacing before it becomes urgent. She was quiet for a moment. Rain tapped lightly on the canvas bag, on the sidewalk, on the roof of the garage across the street. You own that place? Have for a while. Webb's, yes. She looked at the building, then back at him. Something moved across her face that he couldn't fully read. Not suspicion, more like calculation. The way someone looks when they're deciding how much a situation is worth. Soleil Carter, she said. He took the hand she offered. Ezra Webb, I know who you are. She said it simply, without performance. You fixed my roommate's transmission last fall. She talked about you for a week. Brianna Tate. Drives a gray Honda, the Accord. He nodded once. Timing chain. She'd been ignoring it for too long. That's Brianna. A small smile. Gone as fast as it came. Then she looked down at her chair, and the smile went with it. The bushing. How hard is that to fix? 20 minutes. If you have the part, do you? He thought about it. Might have something compatible in the back. Come by when you want. She nodded. He handed the wrench back. She dropped it in her bag. He turned to go back to the garage. Stopped, turned back. You okay getting back wherever you're going? I'm fine, he believed her. That was the thing. She said it the way people say things when they mean them, not the way people say things when they want you to stop worrying. There was a difference. He had learned to hear it. He went back to the Buick. She was gone by the time he looked up again. He did not think about her for the rest of the morning. He had a 1994 Silverado with a brake line issue at 9, a minivan with a mysterious electrical fault at 11. Lunch was a ham sandwich over the sink because he had forgotten to buy bread again and made do with the heels. In the afternoon, he started on a clutch replacement that would have been routine if the previous shop, which hadn't installed the pressure plate wrong, which they had, which meant undoing someone else's mistake before he could do the job right, which took 3 hours instead of 1. That was most of the work, undoing what someone else had gotten wrong. He locked up at 6:15, drove home, heated leftover red beans and rice, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the weather on the local news, not because he cared about tomorrow's forecast, but because the sound of another voice in the room made the evening feel less like something to get through. He thought about the Buick, the brake line on the Silverado, the clutch job he'd finish in the morning. He did not think about Soleil Carter. He thought about Nia. He always thought about Nia, somewhere underneath everything else, the way you're always aware of a sound once you've learned to hear it. Not in the sharp way of the first year. More like pressure now. Present. Persistent. Sometimes he would be in the middle of something entirely ordinary and he would think Nia would have something to say about this, and the thought would move through him and settle, and he would keep going. That was grief at 3 years out. Not loud anymore. Just always there. He went to bed at 9:30. He slept badly, but he always slept badly, so it did not register as anything unusual. She came back on Thursday. He heard the wheel before he saw her. That particular drift in the movement, the slight pull he'd identified 2 days ago. She rolled through the open bay door with the energy of someone who has already decided they belong somewhere before they've verified that they do. I found the bushing. She set a small paper bag on the corner of his workbench. Auto parts place on Morrison. The guy there said it might not be compatible, but it looked right to me. Ezra dried his hands on a shop rag, walked over, looked in the bag, pulled out the part, turned it over. It's right, I know. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was something almost combative about the way she held herself that he found, unexpectedly, not annoying but interesting, like a torque reading that was slightly off. Something to pay attention to. Sit tight, he said. I'm always sitting. He caught the flatness in it. Not self-pity. Just fact delivered without packaging. He nodded and got to work. She watched him. Not the way customers usually watched, half distracted, checking their phones. She watched the way someone watches when they actually want to understand what they're seeing. Her eyes tracked his hands. When he reached for a tool, she noted which one. When he made an adjustment, he could see her processing it. You're at Morehouse, he said. Not a question. He'd seen the lanyard hanging from her bag, the Morehouse crest, worn at the edges. Engineering, she said. 3rd year. What kind? Mechanical. Concentration in systems design. He worked the old bushing out. Checked the housing. You like it? I like solving things, she said. Whether that counts as liking engineering specifically, I'm not sure yet. He found that honest enough to be interesting. The two aren't always the same. No, she agreed. They're not. He pressed the new bushing in. Clean, correct alignment. He tested the caster rotation. Smooth. The pull was gone. Done, he said. She moved the chair forward, backward, turned it in a full circle. The drift was gone. What do I owe you? Nothing. 20-minute job. You spent time on it. So did you. He went back to his workbench. Parts cost you enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then can I ask you something? You can ask. The chair mechanism. The way the weight distributes when you push. You said it was a design flaw in the Q7 model. Do you know much about the engineering on mobility equipment? He thought about how to answer that. Chose the honest version. Some. Picked it up over time. Enough to fix the common failures. What about building, she said. Not fixing. Building. He looked at her directly now. Building what? She did not look away. There's a device. It's not on the market yet. Not commercially. Research hospitals have been testing it for 2 years. It's a passive exoskeletal support system, basically a lightweight external frame that assists voluntary leg movement in patients with partial spinal injuries. She said it the way she'd said everything else, like a report. Precise, controlled. The clinical results have been strong. 40% of patients with my injury profile showed measurable improvement in voluntary movement within 6 months of use. And you want one. I need one. She corrected him gently but clearly. The difference matters. What's the cost? $180,000, which is what it costs to be part of the early access program at the research hospital in Charlotte. She paused. Or to purchase one of the 2 commercially available versions from overseas suppliers which aren't FDA approved and which my insurance won't touch. Ezra was quiet. I have a scholarship that covers tuition, she said. I have a part-time job that covers my half of the rent. I have a father who has a great deal of money. She stopped. Something shifted in her expression, briefly, before she put it back where it was. And reasons why I'm not asking him for it. He did not push on that. Why are you telling me this? She looked at the workbench, at the tools, at the photograph of Nia on the wall, which she had been carefully not looking at since she came in, which meant she'd noticed it immediately. Because you understand how things work, she said. And because I think you understand that a problem having an expensive solution doesn't mean it's the only solution. The garage was quiet except for the fluorescents. Ezra looked at his workbench, at the notebook on the lower shelf, the one he used for sketching out mechanical problems when the solution wasn't coming to him. He looked at Thomas Webb, 1961 on the side of the toolbox. He looked at Nia. I don't make promises I don't know I can keep, he said. I'm not asking for a promise. She picked up her bag, adjusted it on her shoulder. I just thought you should know the problem exists. She left. He stood at the workbench for a long time after. Then he picked up the notebook. He didn't write anything that night. He just sat with it open, thinking about load distribution. Thinking about what passive assistance meant in mechanical terms versus what it meant to a body in motion. Thinking about the difference between a system that replaces function and one that supports what's already trying to work. He was still at the workbench at 11 o'clock when the back door opened and Dion Washington let himself in the way always let himself in, which was without knocking, because he'd been doing it for 40 years and did not appear interested in changing. Dion Washington was Ezra's cousin on his mother's side and had been his closest friend since they were children and had never once in their lives run out of things to argue about. He was built wide and solid, with a laugh that arrived before he did in most rooms and hands that could rewire a building or shuck oysters with equal competence. He had an opinion about everything. He shared it freely. He was wrong often enough to be interesting and right often enough to be infuriating. He looked at Ezra, looked at the notebook, looked at the photograph of Nia. You eating? He said. I ate. What? Beans and rice. From when? Tuesday. Dion made a face. That's a biology experiment, not dinner. He pulled up the old stool he always used, sat down, looked at the notebook again. What are you designing? Nothing yet. Then what are you thinking about designing? Ezra looked at him. Dion had always had that particular gift. He could read the difference between a man thinking and a man working through something, and he knew which one this was. A young woman came in today, Ezra said. 3rd-year engineering student. Morehouse. Partial spinal injury. Uses a chair. There's a device that could help with her recovery. Research stage. She needs it and can't afford it. Dion was quiet for a moment. Okay. She thinks I might be able to build something, can you? I don't know yet. But you're sitting here at 11 o'clock with your grandfather's notebook thinking about it. Ezra said nothing, which was with Dion the same as saying yes. Dion leaned back. The stool creaked. What's her name? Soleil Carter. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that has a shape to it. Dion's expression did something specific, a tightening around the eyes, and then he exhaled slowly through his nose. Ezra. Say it. Carter. He said the name carefully, like a man setting something fragile on an uneven surface. As in Darius Carter. Carter MedTech. Ezra did not move. She's his daughter, Dion said. Only child. I heard she was at school up here. He stopped. I didn't put it together until right now. The name sat between them in the fluorescent light. Darius Carter. Carter MedTech, the largest medical device company in the Southeast. The company that had been approached 3 years ago by Ironwood Regional Hospital as part of a regional healthcare funding initiative. The company whose CFO had sent back a 2-paragraph denial letter citing Q3 budget constraints. The company whose name was on the document Ezra had read 17 times in the weeks after Nia's surgery, trying to understand the chain of decisions that had left a 21-year-old woman waiting 6 months for a procedure that a better-equipped hospital could have performed in 6 days. Carter MedTech, Darius Carter, Soleil's father. Dion was watching him. You didn't know. Do you want to? Dion paused, chose his next words. Do you need some time with this? Ezra looked at the notebook, at the blank page he'd been staring at for an hour, at the rough sketch in the margin, just a gesture, a few lines that weren't a design yet but were the beginning of thinking like one. He looked at Nia. He thought about a girl across the street in the rain, trying to fix her own wheelchair with the wrong wrench, too proud to ask for help, but not too proud to accept it when someone offered correctly. He thought about what it means to let anger make your decisions for you. He had been down that road in the first year. He knew where it went. He thought about what his grandfather had written inside the cover of this notebook, the one line that had been there since before Ezra could read. He had memorized it young and never needed to look at it again. Do the work in front of you. He closed the notebook, looked at Dion. She's not her father, he said. Dion held his gaze for a moment, nodded once. No, she's not. The garage was quiet. I'll need to look at the current research on partial injury exoskeletal systems, Ezra said. You still have that contact at the university library. Dion stood. I'll call her in the morning. I don't know if this is buildable, Ezra said. I don't know if I have what it takes to get there. No, Dion agreed. But I've watched you figure out problems that nobody else could see a way through for 30 years. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door. You're the only person I know who fixes things not because it's your job, but because you physically cannot stand a broken thing in your presence. He left. Ezra sat alone. He reopened the notebook. He started to draw. The first sketch was rough, barely a sketch at all. More like a diagram of what the problem was before he could think about what the solution might be. He drew the spine, the points of injury, the voluntary muscle groups that were still active, the gap between what the body was trying to do and what it could currently accomplish. He drew it like an engineering problem, because it was one, a load distribution challenge, a question of how to provide structural support without eliminating the work that the body needed to do on its own to continue recovering. He worked until 2 in the morning. He came back at 5. He spent 2 weeks reading everything he could find. Research papers from university medical programs, case studies from rehabilitation clinics, patent filings from the companies currently developing commercial versions. He read the way he'd always read technical material, slowly, circling the parts he didn't understand, coming back to them, asking Dion to find someone who could explain the biology in terms he could work with. Dr. Renee Lawson was Dion's contact. Or, more precisely, she was the head of rehabilitation medicine at Ironwood Regional and had been at a church barbecue with Dion's family the previous summer and had mentioned, in passing, that she wished more people in the community understood what rehab medicine was actually trying to do. Dion had remembered this in the specific way Dion remembered things that became useful later. She called old Ezra on a Wednesday evening. Dion Washington says you're trying to build something, she said. No introduction. No small talk. He liked her immediately. I'm trying to understand if it's buildable, he said. Send me what you have so far. He photographed the notebook pages. Sent them. She called back 40 minutes later. Your understanding of the load distribution problem is correct. Your proposed solution has 3 significant flaws. She listed them, clearly, without softening. But the underlying concept isn't wrong. It's actually closer to the current research direction than most of what I've seen from outside academic settings. Can we meet? Tomorrow, 7 am. I have rounds at 8. She came to the garage. She did not seem surprised by it. She sat on the same stool Dion always used and looked, infant, at the notebook and the sketches, pinned the tools on the bench, and treated all of it with the same professional seriousness she brought to the medical side of the conversation. He told her about Soleil, not about the father, about the injury profile, the recovery potential, the specific device that existed commercially but was financially out of reach. Renee was quiet for a moment. I know about her case, she said. She came to the hospital last year for a consult. She was looking at her options. She paused. She didn't mention any of this. She doesn't know I'm working on it. Renee looked at him. Why? Because if it doesn't work, I'd rather she not know it almost did. She held his gaze. Then she picked up her pen and uncapped it and opened her own notebook. All right, she said. Let's start from the injury profile and work backward. They met every Wednesday, sometimes Thursday too. The garage became something else in those early mornings, a different kind of workshop. Anatomical charts next to engine diagrams. Medical terminology slowly becoming part of Ezra's vocabulary, not replacing the mechanical language but sitting beside it, building a new kind of fluency. Soleil came back for the chair's regular maintenance every few weeks. She did not know about the notebooks. He did not tell her. She would bring her school bag and sit and they would talk, sometimes about the chair, sometimes about her coursework, occasionally about nothing much at all. She was studying systems design, which meant she was learning to think about how individual components created behaviors that none of those components could produce alone. It's what I like about it, she said one afternoon. Her chair was up on the lift, which she had initially objected to, and then conceded was the only sensible way to work on the undercarriage. She had her textbook open on the bench but wasn't looking at it. You can't understand a system by studying one part. You have to see the whole thing in motion. Ezra was checking the left wheel bearing. That's true of most things. It's true of people too, she said, but people are harder. Parts of an engine don't have opinions about being examined. People don't like being taken apart, he agreed. She looked at the photograph of Nia. She did this sometimes. He had noticed she never asked about it. He had not decided yet whether that was respect or caution. Your daughter, she said. He hadn't expected the directness. Yes, she's beautiful. She was. He said it without bracing. He'd learned that the truth was easier to carry when you didn't keep wrapping it in careful language. She passed 3 years ago. Heart. Soleil was quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who doesn't know what to say. The quiet of someone who is deciding whether they have the right to say the thing they're thinking. I'm sorry, she said finally. Simple. No performance. She looks like she was somebody worth knowing. He went back to the wheel bearing. She was, he said. May became June. The designs evolved. The first physical prototype was made from materials he already had in the shop. Aluminum, primarily. Cable routing borrowed from a bicycle brake system. Hinge joints machined on the small lathe in the back. It was rough. It didn't do what it needed to do. It was too heavy on the left side, and the cable tension was inconsistent. He took it apart. Started the next one. The failures were not discouraging. He had built things that didn't work before. That was the process. The failure was data. Every broken thing told you what the correct thing needed to avoid. On the evening of June 11th, a Tuesday, Dion came by after 7. He had food from the soul food spot on Auburn Avenue. Fried catfish. Coleslaw that was too sweet. The way Dion always ordered it. They ate at the workbench. Can I tell you something, Dion said. You're going to anyway. She came by the hardware store today. Dion picked at his coleslaw. Soleil. She was getting supplies for a school project. We talked for a bit. He paused. She's something, Ez. She's really something. I know that. She reminds me a little of... He stopped. I know, Ezra said. He did know. He had thought the same thing the first time she had taken the wrench from him without thanking him. Just taken it and gotten to work, which was exactly what Nia would have done. Does that make this easier or harder? Dion asked. Ezra thought about it. Honestly, both, he said. Dion nodded. They ate in silence for a while. The August heat pushed against the garage walls even at this hour. You know, Dion said, I keep thinking about what you said, that she's not her father. He wiped his mouth. You're right. She's not. No. But her father is still her father. Ezra looked at him. I'm not saying don't do this, Dion said quickly. I'm saying he searched for it. At some point this is going to become real. The design is going to be ready, and you're going to have to figure out what happens next. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. One thing at a time, he said. That's very wise and also not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Dion accepted that. They finished eating. Dion left. Ezra washed his hands and stood at the workbench and looked at the third prototype partially assembled. He looked at the photograph of Nia. He looked at the notebook that had once been Thomas Webb's and was now full of his own handwriting, his own problems, his own partial solutions. He pulled the stool close. He sat down. He got back to work. The night before the fourth prototype was ready, Ezra could not sleep. He lay in the dark and thought about gearing ratios. Thought about cable tension and what the body does when something external tries to help it. Thought about resistance and support and the difference between the two. Thought about Nia and the way she had argued with him about that frayed blue shirt, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. 14 years old and already certain about everything. He thought about a girl in the rain with the wrong wrench. At 4:15, he got up, drove to the garage, and started the work. He did not call Soleil. She had been coming in every Tuesday for the past month. He would wait for Tuesday, and in the meantime, he would make sure the fourth prototype was right. Tuesday came. 7:15. He heard the familiar rhythm of the wheelchair on the sidewalk before she appeared in the bay door. She had her school bag. She was wearing a green dress today, dark forest green, fitted and clean-lined, and she had her hair down, which was new, falling past her shoulders in loose, natural waves. She looked like she'd come from somewhere important, or was headed somewhere. She stopped when she saw what was on the workbench. She didn't say anything. She rolled closer, looked at it, looked at him. "How long?" she said. "A while." "How long is a while?" He told her the truth. "Since the first week you came in." She looked back at the prototype. It was still rough in places. He knew that. It wasn't finished. But the structure was sound, the cable system was consistent, and the joint mechanisms moved the way a body moves, which had taken him 4 iterations and 8 weeks and more late nights than he could count to achieve. "You didn't tell me," she said. "No." "Why?" "Because if it hadn't worked, I didn't want you to know it almost did." She was quiet for a long time. "Does it work?" she said. He looked at her. He looked at the prototype. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I think it might." She turned the prototype over in her hands. Carefully, methodically. She was reading it the way he'd watched her read the wheelchair mechanism, the way an engineer reads a thing, looking for what it's trying to do, looking for where it might fail. She looked up at him. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's find out." And Ezra Webb, who had not allowed himself to hope about much of anything for 3 years, felt something in his chest move. Not loudly, just a small, specific shift, the way a stuck gear finally catches. He reached for his notebook. They got to work. The fourth prototype was wrong in 3 places. Soleil found all 3 before Ezra did. She had been studying it for 20 minutes, turning it over in her hands, testing the joint resistance with her thumb, tracing the cable routing with one finger the way you trace a sentence you're not sure you understand. Ezra watched her work. He did not rush her. He had learned, in the weeks they'd been doing this, that rushing Soleil Carter produced nothing except a sharper version of whatever she'd been thinking anyway. "Here," she said. She pressed the left lateral joint and rotated it past the natural range. It caught. A slight resistance where there shouldn't be any. That's going to cause compensatory pressure on the hip socket during forward movement. "I know." She looked up. "You already found it." "Found it this morning. Haven't fixed it yet." She looked back at the joint. "What's the solution?" "Widening the travel arc. 2 degrees. Maybe 2.5. 2.5, she said without hesitation. The human hip is asymmetric in forward motion. You need the extra half degree, or you'll just trade one problem for another. He had thought 2. She said 2.5. He wrote down 2.5. "Second issue," she said. She moved to the cable housing on the right side, pulled it slightly, released it. The cable tension is inconsistent. It's giving different resistance at different points in the range of motion. That means the assist force isn't predictable. I know that one too. What's causing it? The anchor point is moving under load. Micro-movement. Not visible, but it's there. She thought about that. You need to fix the anchor to something that doesn't flex. What's the material here? Aluminum alloy. Switch that section to something stiffer. You don't need it to be light at the anchor point. You need it to be still. He was already nodding, had been thinking the same thing at 2 in the morning. There was a particular quality to working alongside someone who thought the way you thought. Not the same thoughts, but the same shape of thinking. He had only experienced it a handful of times in his life. Third, she said. She held the frame up and looked at the chest harness attachment. This is going to chafe. After about 40 minutes of use, this edge is going to dig into the lateral rib. I know. That one you didn't fix yet either. That one I don't know how to fix yet. She turned it over, studied the attachment geometry. You need to distribute the pressure over a wider surface. Not a strap, more like a contoured plate, custom fitted to the body it's going on. Which means I need measurements. She looked at him. He looked at her. Oh, she said. Then, after a pause that contained approximately 4 separate decisions, all right. That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Thursday he had the revised anchor point installed and the lateral joint arc corrected. By the following Tuesday he had a preliminary contoured plate rough cut from a high-density composite he'd found in the back inventory, left over from a custom motorcycle tank job years ago, and Renee Lawson had come in that morning and looked at the measurements. Soleil had provided and made 3 adjustments to the plate geometry based on the specific injury profile. The fit matters more than anything else, Renee said. She had brought her own measuring tools. She moved around the workbench with the same precise economy she brought to everything. A device that doesn't fit correctly is worse than no device. It creates compensatory patterns that can delay recovery instead of supporting it. I understand that, Ezra said. I know you do. She looked at him. I'm saying it for the record. Because when this gets to the point where someone else is looking at it, they're going to ask whether you understood what you were doing. And I want to be able to say yes. Exactly. Dion showed up every Tuesday evening with food from somewhere on Auburn Avenue. It became the rhythm of the thing. Mornings were work. Evenings, when Soleil was back at the dorm and Renee was done with rounds, were for eating bad food and arguing about the solutions and going over what the day had produced. Dion was not an engineer. He was something more useful in those conversations, which was a man with no investment in any particular solution being right, who would therefore tell you exactly when a solution sounded wrong. Explain the cable system to me again, he said one Tuesday. Catfish night. He was sitting on the stool with a plastic fork and an expression of concentrated skepticism. Ezra explained it. That part makes sense, Dion said. The part where you said the brain needs to still be telling the leg to move, even with the device helping. Why? Because the goal isn't to move for her, Ezra said. The goal is to help her move herself. The moment the device does the work instead of supporting the work, you're building dependency, not recovery. Dion chewed, thought. So the device has to be smart enough to help without taking over. Right. And you know how to do that. I'm learning how to do that. Dion pointed his fork at the prototype. That distinction you just made. The one between helping and taking over. He paused. That's a good way to think about a lot of things. Ezra looked at him. Just saying, Dion said, and went back to his catfish. July arrived with the specific brutality of a Georgia summer that has decided not to apologize for itself. The garage got hot by 8 in the morning and stayed that way until after dark. Ezra put 2 industrial fans at the bay doors and a third near the workbench, and they moved the heat around without doing much about it, which was more or less what you could expect from fans in July. Soleil came every Tuesday without fail, and then starting in July also on Fridays. She did not ask if Fridays were acceptable. She simply appeared on the first Friday with her school bag and a coffee for him from the diner on Morrison, set it on the corner of the workbench, and said nothing about it. He said nothing about it. She stayed for 2 hours and went home. The next Friday she came back. She was studying the prototype more than he was now, making her own sketches. She would sit at the secondary bench he had cleared for her use and draw, and he would work on whatever garage job was in front of him, and they would exist in the same space in a kind of comfortable parallel that he had not expected and did not know what to call. She talked about her coursework sometimes. Systems design. The way a well-built system fails gracefully instead of catastrophically. How the best engineering anticipates what it doesn't know and builds in room for error, rather than assuming everything will go right. Most systems fail at the interface, she said one Friday afternoon. Not in the components themselves. Where two things have to communicate, that's where it breaks. Same in engines, he said. Gasket failures. Seal failures. The parts are usually fine. The connection between them goes first, because that's where the stress concentrates, always. She was quiet for a moment. Then that's true of people too, he waited. Families, she said. The parts might be fine individually. The connection between them is where the damage happens. He did not push. She had a way of approaching certain things obliquely, circling them, getting close, and then banking away. He recognized the technique because he used it himself. He had not asked about her father again. She had not offered. That changed on the third Friday in July. It was close to 6 in the evening. The worst of the heat had started to break. Soleil was at the secondary bench, not sketching, just sitting with her hands in her lap, which was unusual enough that he noticed. She was looking at the wall above the main workbench. Specifically, she was looking at the drawer just below the workbench surface. The one he kept closed. The one that had, among other things, a folder of documents he had accumulated in the months after Nia's death. Research into the chain of administrative decisions, budget reviews, funding applications, denial letters. He noticed what she was looking at, and he noticed in the same moment that the drawer was not fully closed. It had drifted open an inch, the way that drawer sometimes did, and through that inch a corner of the folder was visible. Just a corner, but enough. She turned her head slightly and met his eyes, and he understood immediately and completely that she had seen more than a corner, that she had looked, that she now knew something she had not known before. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. She looked at the drawer, then at the photograph of Nia, then at him, and in the geography of that look, moving between those 3 points, he could see the calculation happening. She was doing the math, the kind of math that doesn't involve numbers, the kind where you add up things you half knew and finally arrive at the total you'd been avoiding. Her father's company, the denial letter Nia, the timeline. She was quiet for a long time, then she picked up her bag. Same time Tuesday, she said. Her voice was steady. Same time Tuesday, she left. He stood in the garage alone for a while. The fans turned. The heat sat. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed and a child yelled something, and a screen door opened and closed. He opened the drawer, looked at the folder, put it back, closed the drawer all the way. He did not know what she would do with what she'd seen. He did not know whether she would come back Tuesday, or whether the math had changed the geometry of the thing they were building. He thought about calling Dion. He did not call Dion. He went back to the prototype. Tuesday came. She was there at 7:15. Forest green dress again, the one she'd worn the first time she stayed past noon. Her hair pulled back this time. Coffee on the corner of the workbench, same as every Friday. She sat down at the secondary bench and opened her notebook and said, "I've been thinking about the load transfer during the heel strike phase." He sat down across from her. "So have I," he said. "They worked?" She never mentioned the drawer. He never asked. But something had shifted between them, very slightly, like a calibration. A small adjustment to account for what was now shared, even unspoken. It was there in the way she worked that day, with more intensity, more precision, an extra edge underneath everything which was not anger exactly, more like decision. Like she had made up her mind about something, and was working from that resolve. He understood. He thought he understood anyway. August, the 5th prototype. This one worked. Not completely. Not in the way the final version needed to work, but it worked enough. The joint movement was smooth. The cable tension was consistent. The load transfer was correct. Renee had come in 3 days before and validated the biomechanical alignment with the specific language of a physician who does not give compliments carelessly. "This is not a toy," she had said, which from Renee Lawson was practically a standing ovation. The question now was whether it would work on the body it had been built for. That conversation happened on a Wednesday morning. Just the 3 of them. Ezra and Soleil and Renee. The bay doors were open. The morning was still cool enough to be bearable. Renee explained the process, what the first fitting would involve, what they were looking for, what they would adjust. She spoke to Soleil directly, as a patient, with the clinical specificity that Soleil had always preferred to anything softer. Soleil listened, asked 3 questions. Good ones. Then she looked at Ezra. You built this for someone who needed it, she said. Not for me specifically. But you built it for this. He thought about how to answer that. I built it because the problem was there and I thought I might be able to solve it. That's what you tell yourself. That's also true. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression, not quite a smile, but in that direction. All right, she said. Let's see if you solved it. The first fitting took 2 hours. Renee supervised every step. The contoured plate fit correctly, which Ezra had been more anxious about than he'd shown anyone. The joint alignment was close, but needed one adjustment on the right knee hinge, which Ezra made in the moment with a quarter turn on an accessible bolt, because he had designed the system to allow exactly that kind of real-time adjustment, which Renee noted approvingly. Soleil sat in the fitted device and moved. Carefully at first, then less carefully. She tested the joint resistance deliberately, the way she tested everything, pushing to find the limits. She rotated, flexed, extended. She said nothing. He watched her face. She was concentrating. Deeply, completely. Her eyes were tracking inward, reading what her body was telling her. He had seen that look on people working through a complex mechanical problem. He had never seen it on someone working through a complex bodily one. After a long time, she said, the right cable is still slightly loose. He checked it. She was right. 3 millimeters. He adjusted. Better, she said. Renee made notes, checked the joint alignment again, adjusted the chest plate 0.5 centimeter. Then she said, if you want to try to stand, we can try to stand. The garage was completely quiet. Soleil looked at Ezra. He did not look away. She gripped the armrests of her chair, shifted her weight, and she stood, not easily, not completely without effort. The device supported the movement, the cable system engaged, the joints tracked, and her own voluntary muscle movement did the rest, which was the point, which was always the point. She stood for approximately 4 seconds before she sat back down. 4 seconds, Ezra turned away. He walked to the far end of the workbench, stood with his back to the room. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at the wall, which had nothing on it except a tire gauge and an old calendar from 4 years ago that he'd never taken down. He thought about Nia in the hospital. He thought about what it meant to build something that worked. He thought about his grandfather's hands, which he had seen in photographs but never in person, and what those hands had built, and what they had meant to build. He thought, do the work in front of you. He turned back around. Soleil was watching him. Renee was watching him. Neither of them said anything. He picked up his notebook, sat down. Okay, he said. Let's talk about what we need to adjust for the next session. What happened next came from a direction none of them had anticipated. It started with Dion. On a Thursday evening, Dion came by the garage later than usual, without food, which was the first sign something was off. He came in and sat on his stool and put his phone face down on the bench and looked at it for a moment before he looked at Ezra. I need to tell you something, he said. Say it. A man came by the hardware store today, well-dressed, said he was doing research for a client, asked about webs, about you, about what you've been working on. Dion paused. Specifically about whether you'd been developing any proprietary mechanical designs. Ezra was very still. He didn't say who he was working for. But you know, I made some calls. Dion picked up his phone, set it down again. Ezra, I think Carter MedTech knows. The name landed in the room like something physical. Ezra thought about the drawer that hadn't been fully closed, about Soleil's face as she looked at the folder, about what she had or hadn't said to anyone since that Friday. He thought about another possibility, one he'd been avoiding. Where's the notebook, he said. Which one? The 5th prototype design. The full specs. Where did I leave it? He already knew. He had left it on the secondary bench, the one he had cleared for Soleil's use. He had left it there on Tuesday and locked up and gone home. Dion had a key. Dion had come by Wednesday morning to drop off some cable he'd ordered. He looked at Dion. Dion's expression did something complicated. I let someone in on Wednesday, he said. He said he was a friend of yours. Said you'd told him he could pick up a part. He was believable, he seemed. He stopped. He knew your name. He knew what you were working on. Generally, enough to sound right. Ezra said nothing. He didn't take anything, Dion said. He was in there for maybe 10 minutes. But he had a phone. He photographed the notebook. Dion put his face in his hands. Dion, I know, look at me. Dion looked up. He was not a man who showed distress easily. Right now he was showing it. This is not a betrayal, Ezra said. You were lied to. There's a difference. I mean it. You made a mistake. He made a choice. Those are not the same thing. He held Dion's gaze until Dion accepted it. Now, tell me everything you remember about him. Dion told him. The description was precise enough to be useful. 50s. Well-dressed. Corporate presentation but not ostentatious. Spoke with the specific confidence of someone accustomed to getting access by asking for it in the right way. It wasn't Darius Carter. Ezra was certain of that. Whoever it was, they had come on behalf of someone. He thought about the research papers he'd read on the commercial versions of the device. He thought about the company names at the bottom of the patent filings. He thought about what it meant that someone had come asking questions about what he was building before the prototype was finished or filed or formally documented. Someone was paying attention, and that attention was not friendly. He picked up the notebook, looked at the specs, thought about how much information was in there, and how much damage it could do in the wrong hands if used as the basis for a prior claim argument. I need to call Adrian, he said. Dion blinked. Your daughter? She's a lawyer. I know she's a lawyer. You haven't called her about any of this. I know. He was already reaching for his phone. I should have called her sooner. Dion stood, looked at the prototype on the workbench, at the notebook, at the photograph of Nia. You think they're going to try to take it, he said. I think someone is going to try to make it look like they were here first. He found Adrian's number, which is why I need to make sure the record shows we were. Adrian picked up on the second ring. Dad. Her voice had that particular alertness that meant she'd been working late. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said. But I need to tell you what I've been building, and I need you to tell me what I should have done 6 weeks ago to protect it. A pause. You've been building something. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. Because you weren't sure it would work. He looked at the 5th prototype, at the notebook, at the wall where Nia's photo held its place above everything. Yes, he said, another pause longer. He could hear her thinking. Send me photos of everything, she said. Every design, every date, every version. Tonight. She paused again, and Dad. Yeah. Next time you're building something that matters, call me when you start. Not when someone's coming for it. Understood. He sent her everything. The following Monday, Darius Carter arrived at the garage. He came alone. That was the first thing Ezra noticed. No assistant. No driver. Just a black car parked at the curb, and a man who got out of it himself and walked to the bay door and stood there. He was taller than Ezra had expected. The photographs and the name had constructed a certain image, and the man in the bay door revised it. He was 60, maybe 58, broad-shouldered, a suit that fit too well to be off the rack. But the posture was wrong for the suit, slightly hunched at the shoulders, the way a big man carries himself when he's used to taking up too much space and has spent years compensating. He looked at the garage, at the tools, at the workbench. He looked like a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was now not sure it was right. Mr. Webb, he said. Ezra set down the wrench he'd been holding. Mr. Carter. Something moved across Darius Carter's face at the fact that Ezra knew who he was. Not surprise exactly, more like a recalibration. You know why I'm here, Darius said. I know what someone working for you did last Wednesday, Ezra said, so I have a guess. Darius did not flinch. He absorbed it. I want to be direct with you. Then be direct. I know what you're building. He moved into the garage slowly, as if asking permission with each step. He stopped at the workbench, looked at the prototype, looked at it for a long time. My people have looked at the information we have. The design is significant. The approach is... He paused. We haven't seen this specific cable joint combination in the existing literature. Because I developed it here. I know that. He turned, looked at Ezra directly. I'm not here to dispute that. I'm here because I want to make a proposal. You could have called. I wanted to see the garage. Something in his voice when he said it, not sentiment. Something more complicated. Soleil has talked about it. The mention of her name between them felt like a gear catching. Both of them felt it. Ezra waited. She doesn't know I'm here, Darius said. I want you to know that. Why doesn't she know? Darius looked at the photograph of Nia. He looked at it for long enough that Ezra understood he already knew who it was, which meant he'd done research beyond the design specs. Because my daughter and I have a complicated relationship, Darius said, and because I have not always deserved the benefit of the doubt from her. I tried, he said. 3 years ago, when she first came home from the hospital, I had our medical team reach out to the research program in Charlotte. I arranged everything. He paused. She found out, called me, and said she didn't want a door opened because of my name. She wanted to walk through a door she'd found herself. He looked at the floor. I didn't know how to respect that and still be her father, so I did nothing, which was its own kind of failure. He turned back. I'm aware of your history with my company, specifically what happened with Ironwood Regional Hospital. I'm aware of what that decision cost. Ezra was very still. I'm not going to offer you an explanation, Darius said, because an explanation would be a way of making that easier for me, and I don't deserve easier. The garage was quiet. Ezra had thought about this moment. Not this exact version of it, but the moment when he would be in the same room as the name on the letter. He had thought about what he would say. He had drafted versions of it in his head over 3 years, in the dark, in the car, over the sink at midnight. He had none of those words right now. What he had instead was something simpler. What are you proposing? He said. Darius reached into his jacket, pulled out a card, set it on the workbench. A meeting, with me and my legal team and whoever you want in the room, to discuss a formal partnership structure that keeps the design in your control. My company approached your hospital 3 years ago about funding. I know. The denial letter. I know what the letter said. Something moved across Darius's face. I'm beginning to understand things about that letter that I should have understood sooner. Ezra looked at the card. Why? He said. Not what he was proposing. Why? Darius was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was careful. Because my daughter is using a device you built for her out of scrap and time, and something I don't have a corporate word for. And because she is. He stopped. She talks about this garage the way she used to talk about things when she was younger. Before she stopped talking to me about things. Ezra said nothing. That's not a business reason, Darius said. I know that. But you asked why. That's the true answer. He left. Ezra stood alone in the garage. He looked at the card. He looked at the prototype. He looked at Nia. He picked up his phone and called Adrian. Someone just left a card on my workbench, he said. Who? Darius Carter. The silence on the other end had texture to it. What did he want? A meeting. Are you going to take it? He thought about Soleil standing for 4 seconds. He thought about Dion's face when he realized what he'd let happen. He thought about Thomas Webb, 1961, and the notebook full of problems half solved. He thought about what it means to finish what you started. I'm going to take the meeting, he said. I'll be there. I know you will. He hung up, went back to the prototype, checked the cable tension on the right side, which was still slightly loose, which he had been meaning to address for 2 days. He tightened it, tested it. Good. Then he sat down at the workbench with his notebook, and he started working on the 6th version, because the 5th was almost right, but almost right was not right, and he had not come this far to stop at almost. The thing about building something from nothing, the thing he had learned across 30 years of work and 1 devastating loss and 8 weeks of prototype failures, was that the hardest part was never the technical problem. The technical problem had a solution. You found it or you didn't, but the problem itself was finite. It had edges. The hardest part was keeping yourself honest about why you were doing it. He looked at Nia, he knew why. He picked up the wrench. He got to work. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday, which felt personal, because Tuesday was Soleil's day, because Ezra had been at the workbench at 6:40 in the morning, adjusting the ankle articulation on the 6th prototype, coffee going cold beside him, thinking about nothing except the problem in front of him. And then Adrian called, and then everything else stopped. Patent infringement, she said. No preamble, no cushioning. That was Adrian. Carter MedTech filed this morning. They're claiming the cable joint system in your device is derivative of 3 existing patents in their portfolio. Ezra set down the tool in his hand. Is it? No, flat. Certain. I've been through their patents. The overlap is superficial. Someone with mechanical knowledge and legal knowledge working together could construct an argument, but it's thin. They know it's thin. She paused. That's the point. Explain. They don't need to win, she said. They need to delay. If they can keep this in litigation for 8 to 12 months, they can bring their own version of the device to market first. At that point, even if you win the case, you're second. And second in the medical device space means nothing. Ezra was quiet. They're not fighting your design, Adrian said. They're fighting your timing. He looked at the 6th prototype on the workbench, at the notebook beside it, at Thomas Webb, 1961, sitting in its place, at Nia on the wall above everything. What do we do, he said. We fight, no hesitation. And we start by establishing prior art. We document every version, every sketch, every date, every test. We build a record that shows the development timeline and we make that record undeniable. She paused again. And I need to know one more thing. Ask it. Does Darius Carter know his company filed this? Ezra thought about the man who had stood in his garage, who had set a card on his workbench and said he was beginning to understand things about that letter that he should have understood sooner, who had spoken about his daughter the way someone speaks when they're trying to tell you something they don't have the right words for. I don't know, Ezra said. Find out, she said, before we assume anything. He sat with the phone in his hand after she hung up. Soleil arrived at 7:15, same as always. Green dress today, different shade, more olive than forest. Hair down. Coffee on the corner of the workbench. She looked at his face and stopped. What happened, he told her. She was very still while he talked. The kind of still that isn't calm. That's controlled. Her hands were in her lap and she didn't move them. Her eyes stayed on his face. When he finished, she said, My father. His company. Same thing. Maybe. She looked at him. You don't think he knew? I think there are people at that company who make decisions without him knowing. I think he told me that himself, in different words. He paused, but I don't know. She looked at the prototype, at the document Adrian had sent to his phone, which he'd set face up on the bench. 3 claims, 12 pages, a lot of words that meant, we saw what you built and we want to stop you. I need to call him, she said. Soleil. I know. She picked up her bag, put it down again. Picked it up. I know what I'm walking into. I've been walking into it my whole life. She looked at him and her eyes were steady, and he thought again, as he had thought many times, that she had a kind of composure that was not coldness but its exact opposite. A warmth so controlled it looked like stone until you'd been around it long enough to feel the heat. He's still my father. Yes. And whatever he did or didn't do, I'm the one who has to talk to him. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder. Don't touch the prototype until I get back. She left. He did not touch the prototype. He called Dion. Dion arrived in 11 minutes, which meant he had left whatever he was doing without finishing it, which was the measure of how seriously he was taking the call. He came in, looked at Ezra, looked at the document on the bench, and sat down on his stool. How bad, he said. Adrian thinks manageable, but it has to be fought. With what? Prior art, the documentation of everything. He stopped. Thomas's notebooks. Dion blinked. Your grandfather's notebooks. He worked on something similar 30 years ago. For his friend Clarence, who lost mobility in a workplace accident. He had been thinking about this since Adrian's call, rolling it over, seeing where it fit. I have the notebooks. They're in the back, in the storage room. Adrian doesn't know about them yet. Dion was quiet for a moment. If those notebooks show concept development that predates Carter Medtech's patents, then the prior art argument gets a lot stronger. Do they? I think they might. He had not looked at those notebooks in 3 years. He had not been ready to look at them. His grandfather had given them to Ezra's father, and his father had given them to him, and he had put them in the back room in a box with other things he was not ready for and closed the door. I'll get them, Dion said. No. He stood. I'll get them. He went to the back room. It smelled of old oil and dust and the particular dry warmth of stored things. He found the box on the third shelf. It was heavier than he remembered. He carried it to the workbench and set it down and opened it. The notebooks were on top. 4 of them. Black covers, worn at the corners. He recognized his grandfather's handwriting without ever having seen it except in photographs. Tight. Efficient. The handwriting of someone who wrote to record, not to impress. He opened the first one. The sketches were on page 12. He looked at them for a long time. Not identical to what he'd built. Of course not. Technology changed, materials changed, understanding changed. But the underlying principle was there, drawn by a man 60 years ago, who had looked at a friend who couldn't walk and thought, there has to be a mechanical way to help. Dion, he said. Dion looked over his shoulder, looked at the sketches, looked at the date in the corner. Well, Dion said. Yeah. Dion put his hand on Ezra's shoulder briefly. Then he stepped back. You need to call Adrian again. Ezra was already reaching for his phone. Adrian's reaction was not surprise. It was the specific controlled energy of a lawyer who has just been handed a stronger hand and is immediately calculating how to play it. Photograph every page, she said. Today. Send it tonight. Don't let those notebooks out of your sight until we have copies. You think it's enough? I think it changes the conversation significantly. She paused. Dad, I need you to come to Atlanta this weekend. I want to prepare properly before anything else happens. I'll be there Saturday. Good. Another pause. Smaller. Are you okay? He thought about that. Honestly, I'm working on it. That's the most reassuring thing you've ever said. The word got out. He didn't know exactly how. Ironwood was not a small town in the way that some towns are small, but it had the specific interconnectedness of a black community that had learned, across generations, that looking out for its own was not optional but essential. Word moved through Greater Hope Baptist, through the HBCU alumni network, through the neighborhood association that met at the community center on Tuesdays, through the informal networks of women who had known Ezra's mother and his grandmother and who had watched this garage exist on this corner for longer than most of them had been alive. By Thursday, people were stopping by. Not dramatically, not with signs or speeches, just stopping. Harold Bennett from the hardware store 2 blocks over came by and left a bucket of high-grade fasteners on the bench with a note that said, use whatever you need. Mrs. Aldridge, whose Buick Ezra had been maintaining for 11 years, came by with a casserole and then sat in the plastic chair by the first bay for 45 minutes without saying much, which was, Ezra understood, its own kind of statement. Pastor Jeremiah Odom from Greater Hope came on Thursday afternoon. He did not come with scripture. He came with information. The church has a discretionary fund, he said. He was a tall man, 60s, the kind of physical presence that made a room reorganize itself without him trying. We've been talking. There's enough there to cover initial legal costs, filing fees, document preparation, whatever the first round requires. Ezra looked at him. That money is for the congregation. You are the congregation, he said it simply. And what's being done to you is being done to this community. Carter MedTech thinks they're suing one man. He paused. They're about to find out what they're actually dealing with. Ezra did not have words for that. He was not a man who easily lost words. He found a few. Tell the deacons thank you, he said. Tell them yourself Sunday. Pastor Odom looked around the garage, at the workbench, at the tools, at the prototype under its cloth cover. This is sacred work, Ezra, the kind that gets remembered. He left. Dion appeared from the back room where he'd been very deliberately staying out of the conversation. You heard all of that, Ezra said. Every word. He sat on his stool. You know what Clarence would say. Your grandfather's friend. I didn't know Clarence, no. But you built what your grandfather was trying to build for him. Dion looked at the covered prototype. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Adrian arrived Saturday morning. She drove from Atlanta in a car that was too nice for Ironwood's roads and parked it in front of the garage without worrying about it. She was 38, which still surprised Ezra sometimes, because he had not caught up to the fact that the child who had watched him work from that same plastic chair was now a woman in a structured blazer with a briefcase and 3 associates who waited in the car while she went in alone. She walked in, looked at the garage, looked at him. Did not do what some people would have done, which was comment on the emotion of being back. She was his daughter in more ways than genetics. She went straight to the workbench. "Show me the notebooks," she said. He showed her. She studied them for 20 minutes without speaking. Her associates came in eventually, and she handed them notebooks and spoke to them in the shorthand of people who have worked together long enough to abbreviate, and they photographed and documented and cross-referenced with the Carter MedTech patents on their tablets. Then Adrian looked at the prototype. "Can I see it?" she said. He uncovered it. She did not touch it. She looked at it the way she'd looked at the notebooks, carefully, respectfully. "You built this," she said. "Yes, in this garage." Yes, she looked at the photograph of Nia, looked at it for a while. She would have had something to say about this. She would have been helping, he said. She would have been the one arguing with me about the cable tension. Adrian smiled, small and real. Yes, she would have. She turned back to the prototype. "Okay, here's where we are." She laid it out. The prior art argument was strong, stronger with the notebooks. The timeline documentation was solid. The design difference from Carter's patents was arguable, and with the right expert witness, winnable. But the timeline of the lawsuit was the real problem. Litigation moved slowly. Carter MedTech's legal team would move to slow it further. Delays would be filed. Discovery would be extensive. "They're counting on you not having the resources for a sustained fight," she said. "How long does a sustained fight take?" "Could be 2 years." He absorbed that. "But," she said, "there's a faster path." She opened her briefcase. Set a document on the bench. An emergency injunction to halt any Carter MedTech product development based on the misappropriated specs, combined with a counterclaim for trade secret violation. If we can demonstrate they obtained the design information improperly, the case changes shape entirely. Can we demonstrate it? She looked at Dion, who was on his stool, who had been quiet for the last hour because Adrian in professional mode produced in Dion a respectful silence that very few other things achieved. Dion said, "The man who came in Wednesday. I can describe him in detail. I can give you the time. I saw his car. Did you get plates? Last 4 digits. Adrian looked at him. "You remembered the plates. I felt wrong about it the second he left," Dion said. "So I stood in the door and looked." Adrian wrote something down. That might be enough to identify him. And if he's a Carter MedTech contractor, the chain becomes traceable. She kept writing, and then the door opened. Not Soleil. Not a customer. Not anyone Ezra had been expecting. Renee Lawson walked in with her medical bag over one shoulder, and her phone in her hand and an expression on her face that Ezra had not seen there before. Renee's default was controlled, professional. The expression she was wearing now was something closer to fury, which on Renee Lawson's face was a quiet and precise and somewhat frightening thing. She looked at Adrian. "You're the lawyer." "Yes." "Good." She set her phone on the bench. 2 days ago, a man called me, said he was a medical consultant doing due diligence for a technology firm. Asked me questions about the device, about whether the design met clinical standards, whether there were any safety concerns I could speak to. She paused. He was professional. He was thorough. And at the end of the conversation he suggested, in very careful language, that if I were to indicate there were clinical concerns about the design, he could ensure that my name appeared favorably in the documentation of whatever device his client brought to market. The garage was completely silent. "He offered you something," Adrian said. "He offered me credit I didn't earn on a product I didn't build." Renee looked at Ezra, which is the part that made me understand exactly what was happening. "You recorded it," Adrian said. Renee picked up her phone. Every word. Adrian looked at the phone, looked at Renee. "Dr. Lawson, I need you to understand that this recording could make you a witness in a legal proceeding." "I'm a physician," Renee said. "I've testified before. I'm not afraid of a courtroom." She set the phone down. "What I am afraid of is a world where the people with resources can use legal machinery to take from the people who build things. And I've been afraid of that long enough to do something about it when I get the chance." Dion from his stool, "I really like her." Renee glanced at him. "You must be Dion." "I am. Soleil mentioned you. Only good things, I hope. She said you always bring the wrong kind of hot sauce." Dion opened his mouth, closed it, That is extremely subjective. Adrian was already on her phone calling one of her associates into the building. She took the recording. She took Dion's description of the man from Wednesday. She took the notebook photographs and the timeline documentation and the prototype specs, and she began building something in the corner of the garage with her associates that looked a lot like a legal case that had some teeth to it. Ezra stood at the main workbench and watched. He thought about what it meant that all of these people were here. Harold Bennett's fasteners, Mrs. Aldridge in the plastic chair, Pastor Odom's discretionary fund, Renee's recording, Adrian's briefcase, Dion's 4 digits of a license plate. He thought about his grandfather's notebooks. He thought about a man in 1983 who had looked at a friend who couldn't walk and picked up a pencil. He thought about how some things don't die. They wait. They pass from hand to hand through the generations until someone is in the right place, at the right time, with the right tools to finish what was started. He looked at Nia. Soleil came back that afternoon. She came in quietly, without her bag, without coffee. She stopped just inside the bay door and looked at Adrian and Dion and Renee and the 2 associates and all of the documents spread across every available surface. She looked at Ezra. "How much of this is because of my father?" she said. Not a question, a reckoning. "Some of it," Ezra said. "Not all of it." She looked at Adrian. "You're his daughter." "Yes," Adrian said. Soleil looked at the prototype under its cover. "I called him," she said. "My father." Everyone in the garage went still. "Tell us," Ezra said. She walked to the secondary bench. Sat down. She held herself the way she always held herself. Upright, controlled. But something underneath was different. A hairline fracture in the composure. Visible only because he'd been watching her long enough to know what the composure looked like when it was intact. "He didn't know about the lawsuit," she said. "Or he says he didn't." She paused. "I believe him. Not because I trust him fully. Because I know how to read him when he's lying, and this wasn't it." She looked at her hands. He was furious. In the way he gets furious when he's also ashamed, which is a specific kind of fury he doesn't usually let people see. "Holland Frost," Adrian said. Soleil looked up. "You know the name. I've been doing research for the last 2 days. Frost is the CFO. He has operational authority over a significant portion of the company's legal filings. He's done this before. Smaller companies, usually ones that don't have the resources to fight back." Soleil was quiet for a moment. "My father is calling an emergency board meeting Monday." She looked at Ezra. "He wants to talk to you. He can call Adrian, he knows." She paused. "He asked me to tell you something else." She looked at her hands again, then up. "He said he found the file on the Ironwood Regional Hospital grant application. The original application, not the denial letter. The full file, including the internal memo Harlan wrote recommending rejection." She stopped. The reasons in that memo were not budget constraints. The garage was very quiet. "What were they?" Renee said. Soleil's jaw was tight. "Harlan wrote that investing in Ironwood Regional would signal willingness to fund under-resourced hospitals in the region, which would create, quote, expectations they were not positioned to meet." She said it carefully, precisely, like testimony. He called it a boundary-setting decision. The word sat in the room. Ezra looked at Nia. He stood at the workbench for a long time. No one spoke. Even Dion, who had a comment for everything, was silent. Then Adrian said quietly, "Dad." "I know," he said. "Are you okay?" He thought about that, honestly. The way he always tried to think about things. What does okay mean? What does it mean to be standing in a room full of people who showed up? What does it mean to be holding your grandfather's notebooks and looking at your daughter's photograph and hearing for the first time the exact mechanics of how she died? Not the medical facts. He knew those. The administrative facts. The decision that had been made in a boardroom by a man in a suit who had thought of it as a boundary-setting decision. What does okay mean after that? "No," he said. "But I'm still here." Adrian nodded. Soleil was watching him. Her eyes were very steady. "Mr. Webb," she said. He looked at her. "I'm sorry," she said it simply, without qualification or performance. "I know it's not my apology to make, but I'm making it anyway." He held her gaze for a moment. "It's not yours to carry," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I'm going to carry it with you for a while, if that's all right." He didn't have a word for what that was. He found one eventually. Yes, he said. That's all right. The Ironwood community meeting happened on Sunday evening at Greater Hope Baptist. Ezra had not asked for it. Pastor Odom had organized it. He had simply told Ezra it was happening, and that people wanted to be there, and that Ezra could speak or not speak as he chose. But either way, the community intended to be informed. He went. The fellowship hall was full. Every chair taken. People standing along the walls. Faces he had known for decades. Faces he'd seen in this building for Nia's memorial. Faces he'd seen in the garage, in the hardware store, at the diner on Morrison. Young faces too. Morehouse students. Howard alumni who'd moved back. Young professionals who had grown up in Ironwood and come back and were trying to build something here the way every generation tried to build something in the place that made them. He stood at the front of the room and told them the truth, all of it. The prototype, the lawsuit, Thomas Webb's notebooks, what Harlan Frost had done and what the memo had said. He told it without editorializing, without performance. He said the facts and let the room feel them. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Harold Bennett stood up. Tell us what you need. And that was it. That was the whole shape of it. Not outrage, not speeches. Practical, specific. What do you need? People spoke. Resources were identified. Contacts were named. A patent attorney from Atlanta who had grown up in Ironwood and owed the community something. A digital documentation specialist who could help build the evidentiary record. Former Carter MedTech employees in the room who had information about Frost's pattern of unilateral decisions. 2 of them. In the room. Adrian was in the back with her notebook open and she was writing fast. Dion leaned over to Ezra at one point and said, very quietly, Carter MedTech's legal team is about to be very surprised. Ezra looked around the room, at the faces, at the hands raised, at the network of relationships and history and mutual obligation that had been building in this community for over a century, that had survived things worse than this and come out with its spine intact. He thought about what Harlan Frost had thought he was doing, filing a lawsuit against one man, one garage, one prototype. He thought about how wrong that was, not strategically, morally, because the thing Harlan Frost had not understood, the thing that people who made boundary-setting decisions in boardrooms never understood, was that you cannot look at a community and see only its smallest element. You cannot look at Webb's auto repair and see only a garage. You cannot look at Ezra Webb and see only one man. You see one man. But what's behind him goes back generations. Soleil was near the back of the room. She had come without telling him she was coming. She sat in her chair slightly apart from the crowd, watching, not detached, watching the way she watched everything, carefully. Taking it in, he caught her eye once. She nodded. He nodded back. After the meeting, after most people had gone, Adrian found him in the church parking lot. The 2 former employees, she said. One of them has documentation of 3 previous instances where Frost made unilateral decisions about grant denials without board approval, dating back 4 years. Ironwood wasn't the first. Not even close. She paused. Dad, this isn't just a patent dispute anymore. He looked at her. What Frost did with those grant denials, potentially across multiple hospitals, potentially affecting patient care. She was careful, precise. That's a different kind of legal exposure for Carter MedTech, the kind that gets attention from regulators, not just courts. He thought about that. Adrian. Yeah. Is Darius Carter going to lose his company? She thought about it, honestly. Not necessarily. Depends on how he responds, whether he cooperates, whether he can demonstrate that Frost acted without authority. She looked at him. That's above my expertise level. Corporate law isn't my practice. But I know people. Call them. I will. She touched his arm. Briefly. Are you going to be able to sleep tonight? Probably not. Okay. She kissed him on the cheek, got in her too nice car, drove toward the highway. He stood in the parking lot for a while. The night was warm. Late summer, the kind of night that still holds the day's heat in the air. Somewhere across town, a late service had let out. He could hear the music fading down, a hymn he knew from childhood but couldn't name. He thought about Thomas Webb, 1961. About notebooks that had waited in a box in a storage room for the right moment. About the idea that some things are built across time, across hands, across generations, each person carrying the next piece forward, until someone finally gets to put it down in its finished form. He walked back to his car, drove to the garage, went inside, uncovered the sixth prototype, sat down, picked up the notebook. Because the work wasn't done, the lawsuit was happening. The board meeting was Monday. Adrian was making calls. The community was building something. All of that was real and all of it mattered. But the prototype still had 3 things he wanted to improve. And tomorrow Soleil would come in at 7:15. And the work would continue the way it always continued. One problem, one solution, one step at a time. He started drawing. Harlan Frost was removed from Carter MedTech on a Monday. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Adrian was not in the room, but she had put the right information in the right hands before it started, and sometimes that is enough. The 2 former employees had signed statements. Renee's recording had been reviewed by 2 separate attorneys. The pattern of unauthorized grant denials went back to 2019. 4 hospitals, 3 states, all of them under-resourced, all of them serving majority black communities. Adrian called at 2:17 in the afternoon. Ezra was under Mrs. Aldridge's Buick, had been since noon. Some things do not stop while the larger things resolve. Brakes still wear. Timing belts still stretch. Life is mostly maintenance. He slid out from under the car. It's done, Adrian said. Frost, terminated. Effective immediately. Unanimous vote. She paused. The grant denial pattern is being referred to the state attorney general. That will take time. But for the lawsuit against you, Carter MedTech is withdrawing the patent infringement claim. Today, voluntarily, he sat on the concrete floor. He had not planned to sit on the floor. His knees simply decided they were done with standing. There's a formal statement, Adrian continued, acknowledging the company obtained design information improperly, that the claim was filed without authorization. Another pause, longer. Dad, I'm here. Are you okay? He looked at the underside of Mrs. Aldridge's Buick, at the brake lines he had just replaced. Clean, solid. The architecture of a car 30 years old and still running because someone had paid attention to it across all that time. Yes, he said. I'm okay, he meant it. Dion took the news with a silence that lasted almost a full minute, which for Dion Washington was a formal ceremony. He sat on his stool, looked at the prototype on the bench, said nothing. Then he stood, rolled up his sleeves, and said, What are we working on? Ankle articulation on the 7th version. Then let's look at the ankle. That was Dion, not the man who celebrated with you. The man who picked up the next tool. Soleil heard the news before Ezra could call her. She appeared at 4 in the afternoon. Not her Tuesday morning timing. A Tuesday afternoon in September, the light coming in low and gold through the bay doors. She walked in, and she was walking more than she had been. Each week, a little steadier than the last, the device doing what it was built to do, and she stood in the middle of the garage floor and said, It's over. The lawsuit is over, he said. Some things are still ongoing. But the thing that could stop this, that part's gone. Yes. She looked at the prototype, at Thomas Webb 1961 on the bench, at Nia on the wall, then at him. I want to try the full session, she said. Not just standing. Not a few steps, she paused. I want to walk the length of this garage and back. He looked at her. Renee needs to be here. I already called her. She's coming at 5. Of course she had. He would have expected nothing less. All right, he said. Let's check the fit first. Renee arrived at 10 to 5. She came in without announcement, bag over her shoulder, the brisk efficiency of someone who has chosen to spend her time here and is not interested in making it theatrical. She checked the device, checked Soleil, asked questions, got answers, made 2 adjustments, stepped back. Dion moved to the bay door, not involved, just present, the way certain people know how to be present, without taking up the wrong hunk of space. Ezra walked to the far end of the garage. 43 feet. He had measured it once years ago for an unrelated reason. The number had stayed. Soleil positioned herself at the near end. She gripped her chair frame to steady herself as she rose. The device engaged. Cable system took the load. Her voluntary movement directed the motion. That was always the point. always. The device did not walk for her. It helped her walk herself. She stood fully upright. She took a breath. She took a step, and then another. Each one deliberate. Each one requiring concentration and the specific no. Each one requiring the kind of courage that belongs only to the person doing the thing, not the person watching, the person doing it. Moving through something she had been kept from for 2 years, one careful transfer of weight at a time. She did not rush. She was not thinking about speed. She was thinking about each extension. Each moment the cable system engaged and released. She was an engineer moving through her own design, testing it from the inside, knowing it in a way no notebook could capture. She passed the midpoint of the garage. Ezra did not move. He stood at the far end and watched her come toward him, and held himself very still, because stillness was the only thing he trusted himself with right now. Anything else and he would not see clearly. And he needed to see clearly. He had built this to see this. She reached him, stopped, breathing, not gasping, the breath of someone who has spent something real and knows its worth. She looked up at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that the moment was not already saying. Sometimes a thing is complete. Sometimes you reach the end of something, and adding words to it would be like drawing on a finished painting. She turned around and walked back, 43 feet in one direction, 43 feet in the other. When she reached her chair, she sat down slowly and deliberately, and then she put both hands over her face. Not to hide, just to have somewhere to put herself for a moment. Her shoulders moved. The sound she made came from somewhere underneath a sob, from deeper than the throat. Renee wrote in her notebook and did not pretend to be unaffected, which was how Ezra knew she was affected, because Renee's default was clinical distance, and she had set it down. Dion turned to face the street and looked at it for a while. Ezra walked to the far wall, put his hands flat on the surface, looked at nothing. Thought about a Tuesday morning in March 3 years ago. Thought about what it costs to lose something and what it takes to build from the materials of that loss. Thought about his grandfather's hands, and his father's hands, and his own hands, and what those hands had made across all the years between then and now. 43 feet. He turned back around. Soleil had taken her hands from her face. Her eyes were red, but her expression was steady. She looked at Nia's photograph on the wall. Looked at it for a long time. She would have had something to say about the cable tension on the third prototype, Soleil said. He was surprised into almost laughing. Yes, she would have, and she would have been right, probably. Soleil looked at her hands, then at him. Thank you, she said. Not for the device. Not for any particular thing. Just thank you the way you say it when the word has to carry more than it was built for. He nodded. Once. That was enough. What he did not tell her, what he had not told anyone, was that the night before this session he had sat in the garage alone until 2 in the morning, and thought seriously about whether it would work. Not the mechanics. The mechanics he trusted. He had thought about whether he deserved to see it work. Whether a man whose grief had driven him to build this thing, grief that was bound up with her father's company and the document in the drawers, and 3 years of a loss that had no clean edges, whether that man was building out of love or out of something more complicated that just looked like love in the dark. He had not resolved it. He had come in at 5 anyway, done the work anyway. Because the answer to that question, whatever it was, did not change what Soleil needed. That was the thing about doing the work. It did not require you to be pure, just present. The meeting with Darius Carter happened the following Thursday, not a boardroom. That had been Ezra's condition, delivered through Adrian, accepted without negotiation. Darius drove himself, parked at the curb, walked in. He was different from the last time. Not in clothing, another suit, another pressed shirt. In posture. The compensating hunch was still there, but the corporate authority had been set down somewhere between the car and the bay door. What came through the entrance was just a man in his mid-50s who had recently learned the shape of a mistake he had been living inside for years without knowing it. Adrian was at the bench with her notes. Renee was there because the medical dimensions of any agreement needed medical oversight. Dion was there because Dion was always there, which was not negotiable. Darius looked at the room. He sat in the folding chair Dion had placed in the middle of the floor, which was the only chair Dion had made available, which everyone in the room understood was not an accident. He sat in it without comment, put his hands on his knees. "I want to speak plainly," he said. Adrian said, "Please." He looked at Ezra. Not at the lawyers, not at the documents. At Ezra. "What Frost did with the Ironwood regional application was not authorized by me. I know that's not an absolution. A decision was made in my company, in my name, and people were affected by it. Your daughter was affected by it." He stopped. "Let that sit. Did not try to move past it too quickly. Saying I didn't know doesn't change what happened. It's just true." Ezra said nothing. "I was handed summary reports. I signed them. I did not read the underlying documentation." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it that had been worked over. The way metal looks after it has been through heat. Changed. Not broken, changed. That is not Frost's failure. That is mine. A man who signs things he hasn't read is responsible for what's in them. The garage was quiet. Adrian said, "What are you offering?" He reached into his bag, set a folder on the bench. A licensing agreement. Ezra retains full patent ownership. Carter MedTech handles manufacturing and distribution. Revenue is 60-40 in Ezra's favor. He paused. The Carter Foundation contributes initial capitalization for a patient assistance fund. Income-based eligibility. And the hospital grant program, Frost eliminated, is being reinstated. Retroactively funded. Ironwood Regional is the first recipient. Adrian picked up the folder, read. No one spoke while she read. Darius sat in the folding chair. Ezra sat at the workbench. Dion looked at the ceiling with elaborate neutrality, which meant he was listening to every word. Renee looked at Darius directly. The Patient Assistance Fund. Eligibility criteria. To be designed in consultation with your clinical team, Darius said. Meaning you. I have conditions. I expected that. The criteria cannot be modified by Carter MedTech without sign-off from an independent medical board. The fund has to be structured so it cannot be defunded by a CFO or any single executive decision. Page 7, Darius said. She turned to page 7, read it. Her expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving, which meant she was satisfied. Adrian looked up from the folder, met Ezra's eyes, gave him a very small nod. The terms were real. He looked at Darius Carter. The man in the folding chair was not the name on the denial letter. He was not innocent of it either. He was something more complicated and more human than either of those things. A man who had allowed insulation to exist between himself and the consequences of decisions made in his name. Who was now sitting in a garage with no lawyer present, no buffer, no prepared statement, trying to reckon with what that insulation had cost. Not redemption. Ezra knew the difference, but accountability. Real accountability. The kind that shows up without a team behind it and sits in a folding chair and says, I signed things I hadn't read, and means it. That was not nothing. The fund, Ezra said. The name. Darius looked at him. That's yours to decide. Ezra looked at Nia on the wall. The Ezra Webb Foundation, he said. For accessible recovery. Darius nodded. Done. Adrian went back to the folder, made 3 requests for language changes. Darius accepted 2 without negotiation and met Adrian in the middle on the 3rd. They shook hands. Documents were signed. Then Darius stood. He did not leave immediately. He looked at the prototype on the workbench, the 7th version, partially assembled. He looked at it the way people look at things that mean more than they prepared for. May I? He said. Ezra nodded. Darius stepped closer. Did not touch it. Just looked. At the cable routing. At the joint housings. At the contoured plate machined to fit a body he had not known well enough. She told me, he said, that the first time she stood up in here, you turned away. Yes. She said she understood why. He was quiet for a moment. I've been trying to understand it. Ezra looked at him. Some moments belong to the person in them. Not the person watching. Darius absorbed that. She's going to be all right, Ezra said. Not as comfort. As fact, I know. His voice for the first time was not a CEO's voice. Just a father's. Which sounds, regardless of everything else a man is, like worry and love and the ache of knowing you cannot fix the most important things. I've known that since she was small. She's always been. He found the word. Sufficient. Whatever I gave her or didn't give her, she was always completely sufficient on her own. Yes. Ezra said. She is. Darius picked up his bag, walked to the bay door, stopped. My father built things, he said. He was looking at the street, not at Ezra. With his hands. Not cars. Furniture mostly. He had a workshop in the back of the house. A pause. I stopped going in there when I was about 15. Too busy? And then he was gone, and I didn't know how to be in there anymore without him. He turned. I think I've been making decisions from a distance ever since. From summary reports and executive overviews. He looked at the toolbox. At Thomas Webb 1961. This is the longest I've been in a room like this in 40 years. He left. The garage was quiet for a moment after. Then Dion said, to no one in particular, huh? Renee looked at him. What? Nothing, he paused. Just, huh. The weeks after moved differently than the weeks before. Not faster. Not slower. Just with a different quality of weight. The lawsuit was gone. The agreement was signed. The Nia Webb Foundation was being structured by Adrian and a non-profit attorney she trusted. The hospital grant program was reinstated. These were facts now, not fights. And the absence of a fight does something strange to the body of a man who has been fighting. It takes a few weeks before the muscles believe it. Ezra kept working on the 7th prototype, then started the 8th. Not because there was something wrong with the 7th. Because there was something he wanted to improve. A micro-oscillation in the left joint that Soleil had identified in a November session, below clinical significance for most patients, but not below her standards, and therefore not below his. The 8th version addressed it. Soleil came on Tuesdays and Fridays. Sometimes Wednesday mornings if she had a gap between classes. She did not announce the extra visits. She simply appeared, coffee on the corner of the workbench, bag over her shoulder, already thinking about whatever problem they were working on. She was walking more each week, not in a straight line of improvement. That was the thing nobody had told him about recovery. It did not go in one direction. It went forward and then sideways and sometimes back, and then forward again, and the backward days were worse than the early days. Because at least in the early days you did not yet know what forward felt like. The backward day came in October. He knew it was a backward day the moment she rolled in. Not walked, rolled. She had her wheelchair and she was in it, and her face was the particular closed expression she got when she was managing something she had not decided to share yet. He said nothing. He was under a car. He stood there. She went to the secondary bench, opened her notebook, sat. 15 minutes passed, then she said, I couldn't do it this morning. He slid out from under the car, stood, wiped his hands. What happened? I woke up and I tried to walk to the bathroom. 6 steps. I've done it 8 days in a row. She looked at the notebook. Today I made it 2. Then I sat down on the floor and stayed there for a while. He pulled the stool over, sat down across from her, at her level. Not standing over her, not crouching down. Just there, that's going to happen, he said. I know that. Knowing it doesn't make it easy. No. She closed the notebook. I keep thinking about the math. 40% chance of meaningful recovery. I'm inside that 40%. I'm doing the work. I have the device. She paused. And some mornings I still sit on the bathroom floor. He thought about what to say. He did not reach for comfort because she was not asking for comfort. She was asking for something else. Something more honest than comfort. The math doesn't account for the days, he said. It only counts the outcome. A 40% chance of recovery doesn't mean 40% of the days feel like recovery. He looked at his hands, at the grease in the lines of his knuckles that never fully washed out anymore. Some days are just the floor. You get up when you get up. She was quiet. Did you get up? He said. I'm here, then you got up. She looked at him. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly. Recognition. The way a person looks when they've heard something true after a long run of things that were almost true. How long did it take, she said. After Nia. Before you could get up reliably. He thought about it honestly. About a year before I stopped counting the days I couldn't. Another year before the counting stopped mattering. 3 years. More or less. She nodded slowly. I've been treating this like an engineering problem, she said. Like if I optimize the inputs, the output will stabilize. It's not an engineering problem. I know that now. She opened her notebook again, looked at the blank page. Or I'm learning it. He stood, went back to the car he'd been working on. After a while she picked up her pen. They worked through the morning, she in her chair that day, him under the car. The garage doing what it always did, which was hold them both, without asking anything from either of them except the work. By noon she was on her feet at the secondary bench, standing without the device, just standing, leaning slightly on the bench surface, looking at a joint diagram she'd drawn. She did not announce it. He did not comment on it. It was not a victory requiring observation. It was just the next thing after the floor. November, the 8th prototype was complete. Renee validated it on a Wednesday morning with the precision she brought to everything, and the brevity she brought to good news. This is the version, she said. And that was all she said about it, which was everything. The first production run was scheduled to begin at Carter Medtech's Atlanta facility in January. Adrian had negotiated the manufacturing contract with the exacting attention she brought to anything she believed in, which meant every clause had been read, every revision had been pushed back on, and the final document was 62 pages that said, in 62 pages worth of different ways, that Ezra Webb owned what Ezra Webb had built. He went to the Atlanta facility once before production began, walked the floor quietly, the way he walked his garage, paying attention to what the space was telling him. He identified 3 things that needed adjustment in the assembly process. The production manager, a woman named Deborah, who had been running manufacturing floors for 20 years and did not suffer fools, listened to all 3 without interrupting, asked 2 follow-up questions, and implemented the changes by end of day. You've done factory work before, she said, not as a question. No, he said, but I've fixed what factories get wrong. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, the nod of someone filing information away in the useful category. The NEA Webb Foundation for Accessible Recovery received its first application on a Wednesday in December. Adrian forwarded it to Ezra at 7 in the morning. A young woman in Macon, 22 years old. Partial spinal injury from a car accident 14 months earlier. Her doctors had identified her as a strong candidate for exoskeletal support therapy. Her family's income was well below the eligibility threshold. The foundation approved full device cost plus clinical support. Ezra read the application, printed it, pinned it to the wall beside Nia's photograph. He did not explain it to anyone who asked. No one asked. They looked at it and understood. Soleil saw it on a Friday morning in December. She came in and stopped, the way she sometimes stopped when something had changed in the garage, and she looked at the photograph and the application side by side, and she stood there for a while. How old is she?
Soleil said. 22.
Soleil did the math. Did not say what the math produced. She did not need to. She set her coffee on the corner of the bench, and sat down and opened her notebook, and they worked, and the application stayed on the wall, and neither of them needed it to mean anything out loud, because it already meant everything it needed to mean just by being there. December brought cold, which in Ironwood meant temperatures in the 40s, and everyone behaving as though it were a genuine hardship, which Ezra had never had patience for, and still didn't. He wore the same blue shirt. The frayed collar was more frayed. He had not replaced it. He would not replace it. Soleil walked into the garage on the last Tuesday of December without her wheelchair. She had been leaving it at the dorm more often. Not always. Not completely. The device was still part of her daily life, would be for some time yet, and Renee was clear-eyed about what the data showed and what it did not yet show, but she had been walking more. Building. The bad days still came. She no longer treated them as failures. She treated them as data points, which was her nature, and she had learned, in the way you learn things that cannot be taught but only lived, that data points include the difficult ones. This particular morning she came through the bay door in a burgundy dress, fitted, the hem landing just above the knee, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she walked in the way she had been learning to walk, which was not the way she had walked before the accident, and not the way she had first moved with the device, but something new, something that belonged to who she was now. She set her coffee on the corner, looked at him. Renee says if the next 3 months hold, she said, we start talking about an adjusted care plan. That's good. It's very good. She paused. She also says the left ankle articulation on my unit is producing a microvariance after 2 hours of extended use. She wants us to look at it. He had not heard this from Renee. Soleil had gotten to it first. When did she tell you? Yesterday. I asked her to send all my session data directly to me, not just the clinical summary. She sat at the secondary bench. I'm not a patient who needs things simplified. No, he said. You're not. She opened her notebook. I've been thinking about the variance. I don't think it's the design. I think it's the calibration drifting under sustained load, which means it's a maintenance issue, not an engineering one. How do you want to address it? A self-calibrating mechanism. Not complex. Just a secondary reference point that the primary joint checks against at intervals. She showed him the sketch she'd already made. Clean. Efficient. The kind of drawing that comes from someone who has been thinking about a problem for longer than she's letting on. He studied it. That's going to require a firmware update to the tension sensor, he said. I know. I emailed the engineer at Carter MedTech this morning. Before you talked to me. I solved it before I got here. She looked at him evenly. I brought you the solution because it requires your sign-off on the design modification. Not because I needed you to solve it for me. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. Walk me through the calibration interval, he said. She walked him through it. He listened. Asked 3 questions. Suggested 1 modification. She considered it. Sketched the modification. Looked at what it produced. And said better. Yes. That works better. He wrote it down. This was how they worked now. Not teacher and student, not designer and subject. Something that did not have a clean name. 2 people who thought in the same shape, solving things together, neither of them carrying more than their share. Renee came by that afternoon to check the unit. She made the calibration adjustment using Soleil's proposed parameters plus Ezra's modification and then tested it through a full 2-hour simulated load cycle using a rig Ezra had built for exactly this purpose. The variance was gone. Elegant solution, Renee said, which from Renee Lawson was a standing ovation and everyone in the room knew it. Soleil accepted the compliment with a nod and went back to her notebook. January. Soleil presented her thesis progress to her academic committee at Morehouse. The device, its design process, its clinical outcomes, its manufacturing pathway. Ezra did not attend. She had not asked him to. He found out she had passed when she called from the parking lot. I passed, she said. I know. You don't know. You weren't there. You don't fail things. A pause. That's not statistically accurate. It's true, though. She was quiet for a moment. I'll be at the garage Thursday. I'll be there. She hung up. He set his phone down. Looked at Nia. Allowed himself something that was not quite happiness but lived next to it. The feeling of a thing going right. Of a gear settling into place after a long time of being slightly off. February, Adrian called to say the State Attorney General's office had opened a formal inquiry into Carter MedTech's grant denial practices. This was not Ezra's case to manage, and he did not try to manage it. He gave Adrian everything she needed when she asked for it, and let the legal process be the legal process. He had learned across the past year that there were systems he could work within, and systems he could not change, and the wisdom was in knowing which was which, and not exhausting himself on the latter. Renee appeared at the garage one Wednesday in February, with a look on her face that Ezra had not seen there before. The second foundation recipient, she said. She set a folder on the bench. Woman in Savannah, 54 years old, MS-related mobility impairment, not the original target population for the device. Outside the design parameters. Technically, she sat on Dion's stool, but her neurologist thinks the passive support mechanism could be beneficial in a different way. Not recovery, maintenance. Slowing the progression of secondary muscle deterioration. She opened the folder. I've been consulting with her care team for 3 weeks. I think we need to run a modified trial. He looked at the folder. You're asking me to adapt the device. I'm asking you to consider it. He looked at Renee. You didn't bring this to Carter MedTech first. I brought it here first, she said, because this is where decisions about this device get made. He held that for a moment. Held what it meant that she had come here, to this garage. To him, not to the company with the manufacturing facility and the legal team and the 62-page contract. Send me her imaging, he said, and the neurologist's notes. Renee smiled, which, On Renee Lawson's face was a small and rare and entirely genuine thing. I already sent them to your email. Of course you did. She stood, picked up her bag. I'll be back Thursday. She left. Dion from the doorway, where he had been ostensibly fixing a light fixture for the past 20 minutes. She sent them before she came to ask you. Yes. So she knew you'd say yes, apparently. Dion stepped down from the ladder. I like her more every week. He folded the ladder. You know what this means. The device working for MS patients. That's a completely different population. I know. That's not a niche product anymore. I know, Dion. That's... He stopped, looked for the word. That's your grandfather's notebook times 1,000. Ezra looked at Thomas Webb, 1961. He thought about a man in a workshop who had looked at a friend who couldn't move and picked up a pencil, who had not known where it would go, who had only known the problem was there, and the problem deserved an attempt. One thing at a time, he said.
Right. One thing at a time.
Dion put the ladder away, came back, picked up his coffee. So, the ankle calibration on the Savannah patient is going to be completely different, right? Completely. And you're going to be up until 2 in the morning working on it. Probably. I'll bring food. March arrived away. March always arrived in Ironwood, unpredictably warmth one day and cold the next, the azaleas starting and stopping and starting again. The 3-year mark of Nia's passing came on a Tuesday. Ezra arrived at 4:30. Made coffee. Set Thomas Webb 1961 on the bench. Stood at the workbench in the early dark and looked at Nia's photograph and the application pinned beside it and the growing collection of small things on that wall. A note from the young woman in Macon's family, handwritten on lined paper, that said thank you but said it the way people say it when they mean something larger than the words. A photograph Renee had printed of her second patient, the woman from Savannah, standing with her walker in a hospital hallway. A child's drawing that Dion had brought in, done by a kid at Greater Hope Baptist who had heard about the foundation, and decided to draw what a garage that built Hope looked like, which turned out to be a large red square with a sun above it and several stick figures who all appeared to be smiling. That drawing had been on the wall for 2 months. Ezra had not taken it down. He was not going to take it down. He looked at Nia. 3 years. He had learned across those 3 years that grief does not diminish. It does not shrink. It becomes part of the structure, load-bearing, the thing that holds the shape of you so that other things can be built on it. He did not want it to go away. He had stopped wanting that sometime in the 2nd year, when he understood that the grief was also the love, and the love was also the grief, and you could not have one without the other, and he was not willing to let go of one to be free of the other. He thought, I built something. We built something. You and me and Dion and Renee and Adrian, and a girl who walked into this garage in a blue dress with the wrong wrench and refused to ask for help until someone offered correctly. Thomas Webb and his notebooks. Your great-grandfather's hands. All of it together building towards something none of us could have built alone. He thought, some things don't end. They just become part of what keeps going. He picked up his coffee. He picked up a wrench. He started the day. Soleil arrived at 7:15. She came through the bay door walking, hair down, a dark green dress today, bag over her shoulder. She set the coffee on the corner of the workbench and looked at the wall, at Nia, at the application, at the Savannah patient photograph, at the child's drawing with the smiling stick figures. She had not been told about the 3-year mark. She had not needed to be. She was 21 years old and she knew how to count. And she had been paying attention to this man for 8 months. She stood beside him at the workbench. I've been thinking about the adapted protocol for the Savannah patient, she said. So have I. The passive support mechanism needs a different tension profile, lower engagement threshold, higher sensitivity to resistance change. I was thinking the same thing. I sketched it out last night. She opened her notebook to the page, set it on the bench between them. Tell me what's wrong with it. He looked at the sketch, took his time. She waited the way she had learned to wait, without filling the silence with anything it didn't need. Nothing's wrong with it, he said. She looked at him. Something's always at least a little wrong with it. The tension curve on page 2. You've got it as linear. It should be progressive. She looked at page 2. Because the muscle engagement pattern is progressive under load. Right. She drew the correction. Studied it. Better. Better, he agreed. Dion arrived at 8 with food from the diner on Morrison. Eggs and biscuits and the wrong hot sauce. He set everything on the bench with the confidence of a man who has never once in his life considered that the hot sauce might be wrong. Soleil looked at the bottle. Dion, good morning to you too. That's the Louisiana blend again. It's a classic. It's not what goes with eggs. Everything goes with a classic Louisiana. You do this every single time. Because every single time I'm right, Ezra ate his eggs. Listened to them argue. Looked at Nia. The garage was full, in the way a place gets full when it has been used for the right things long enough that the purpose becomes part of the walls. The way a church holds the shape of everything prayed inside it. The way a kitchen holds every meal ever made there. The way a garage holds the work of people who believed broken things could be fixed and spent their lives proving it. Outside, on the corner of Delmar and 5th, the Webb's auto repair sign moved in the morning wind. The burgundy paint closer to rust now than to red. His grandfather's lettering. His father's maintenance. His refusal to change what did not need changing. The fluorescents hummed. The coffee cooled. The city woke up around them. And 400 miles away, in a rehabilitation clinic in Macon, a young woman named Kezia was doing something she had not done in 14 months. She was getting out of bed, not alone. Her physical therapist was there, and her mother was there, and the clinical coordinator from the Ezra Webb Foundation had come to observe the first full session with the device. They had fitted it that morning. They had adjusted it twice. Kezia had been quiet throughout the process. The specific quiet of someone managing something too large for ordinary expression. Now she stood, and she walked. Not 43 feet. Not yet. 11 feet to the window of her room, where the morning light was coming in the way. Morning light comes in Macon in March, gold and slightly hazy, the kind that makes everything look briefly like it might be permanent. She stood at the window. Her mother made a session behind her that had no word for it in any language. The clinical coordinator wrote in her report, patient achieved independent ambulation to window, approximately 11 feet, using device. No assistance required. Patient remained standing for 4 minutes before returning to bed under own volition. No adverse events. Recommend continuation. What the report did not say, because reports do not say such things, was that Kezia stood at that window for 4 minutes and looked at the morning and did not say anything. Did not cry, did not perform it for anyone watching, just stood there and looked out at the world. She had not been standing in for 14 months, and breathed, and let it be what it was. She did not know the name of the man who had built the device she was wearing. She knew the name on the paperwork, the foundation name, but she did not know about the frayed collar. She did not know about 43 feet of garage floor. She did not know about a notebook that had sat in a storage room for 3 years, waiting to be the right answer to the right question. She just knew she was standing, and that the standing had been made possible by something someone had cared enough to build, which is, in the end, all any of us can offer the people who come after us. Not the full story, not our names on every piece of it, just the thing we built because the problem was there, and we believed it deserved an attempt. In the garage on Delmar and 5th, Ezra Webb ate his eggs and listened to Soleil and Dion argue about hot sauce and did not know about Kezia at the window in Macon. He would learn about it later, from Renee, who had gotten the report by noon. And when he learned about it, he would go to the wall and look at the application he had pinned there and stand for a while without speaking. But that was later. Right now there were eggs getting cold and a progressive tension curve on page 2 of Soleil's notebook that needed to be refined, and an adapted device protocol for a woman in Savannah who deserved the same attempt that Kezia had gotten and that Soleil had gotten and that every person in that drawer full of applications deserved. Right now there was work, the best kind. The kind that does not end when the problem is solved, because the solving of one problem reveals the next one and the next one and the one after that. And if you are the kind of person who cannot stand a broken thing in your presence, this is not a burden. This is a life. Ezra Webb was exactly that kind of person. He had always been. He picked up his pen, and he got back to work.